Okay, so that's recording. Ginny, it's so great to see you again, and thank you very much for being on the Dr. Tom Show. It's been a long time since we actually met, and we met at 37,000 feet, which is quite a remarkable place to bump into somebody. But I noticed you scribbling away and drawing on that plane on your way back from Thailand. And when we got speaking, you were telling me how you'd been in China for a year and a half, and we started to talk about the cultural differences between art and how art is used in development here and maybe in China. And it really opened up to understand how passionate you are about what you do, which is amazing. And also how you see art can really inspire us and move forward. So I'm so grateful you agreed to come on the show. I think you're going to share some amazing stuff with our listeners. I'm really excited to hear what they think after the show. But if I can start off by just asking you quite simply, did you notice, or are there any cultural differences in how art is used, maybe as people are growing up or in society, between your experiences over in China and maybe your experiences here in the UK?
It's a good question to start with. So I think there's quite a few factors that take into account how and why art is probably viewed and used differently in China. So for my experience when I was there, I was working in an arts university, the Sichuan Fine Arts Institute, and there's a big emphasis on technique. And that's quite an important aspect to be focusing on, which I do think is the UK. So when I say the focus is very much on technique, it's about the passing down and the learning of traditions. And it's the continuation and practice of those traditions. So technique, meaning in an art context, the way that you do something. So how you paint, how you perhaps do ink drawings, how you would do calligraphy, how you would do lacquer work, the skill that is involved in those techniques. In the UK, obviously, that's pretty different. Throughout the 60s and 70s and 80s, there was obviously big changes going on in the way that art was taught in the UK and the way that art was sort of discussed and critically analysed in universities. And the focus for us became much more ideas driven. So it wasn't necessarily how you were painting what you're painting or how you were sculpting what you're sculpting, but it was what you were painting and what you were sculpting. So I think culturally that does make a very big difference, because the art that we tend to see in public spaces and that we see in galleries and museums in China definitely tend to follow that tradition. So there's not as many, I would say that there's not as many different or unusual ways of approaching a problem, because there's much more of an emphasis on the passing down and the keeping of traditions. I think obviously as well, China being the country that it is, obviously there's much bigger and much more serious implications for making artworks that question and criticize authority and governments. So there's obviously a social and environmental, there are social and environmental difficulties in doing what we would do here in the West as well.
Wow. I find it really fascinating when we speak about art, and I think passing down a tradition is brilliant. I also find it funny when we start to really, and correct me if I'm wrong, critically appraise art. Because art is essentially an expression of self, and isn't it extremely subjective? Is it quite hard to be objective with art, to tell someone that art is not good or could be better? Where do we go with that? I surely can teach people how to become better artists. But there come a point when we say, well, that is your expression, as opposed to what it should be.
It's an interesting question. I think I think it comes down to conversations, really. I think that's what a lot of what we do in art schools is have conversations. And that's conversations with different tutors, it's conversations with your peers, it's conversations with technicians. So it's about a dialogue that I think we enter. And as soon as we enter into that dialogue and that dialectic even, it becomes, yes, it's about personal expression, but then actually there's lots of other things that we can factor in. So the more that we discuss and the more that we kind of dig deeper about what it is that you're doing and why it is that you're doing that, we can begin to build on getting deeper into what it is that you're trying to do to give it more authenticity, I would say. So there's also a level in which you're learning as an art student in college or university how to do the thing that you want to do the best to your abilities. So actually there is a lot of technique that you can learn. In painting there's a lot of method, there's ways of looking, and that's the same with sculpture. There's ways of looking and ways of seeing that can alter and change your idea and make it better. So I think it's kind of having a conversation and then building on what it is that you're trying to do, what it is that you're trying to achieve, and go about it in different ways to build on your message, I guess.
I love it. I love the conversation aspect, because I think that is something that's massively lost in certainly a Western approach, and possibly in Eastern, and I can't comment on that. But you see the schooling systems, it's yes or no, 1, 2, or 3, as opposed to let's have a conversation around this. So I've got some really juicy questions to get into, and I'm so excited to hear your views and aspects on these. And the first one kind of piggybacks onto what you just said, but how do you think art can inspire us? What do you think art can do to inspire us? Where do you see its place in life and in society?
Yeah. Wow. Good question. So how does art inspire us? I think what art does fundamentally is it opens up a space for us to reflect and for us to think. So I went to the Yorkshire Sculpture Park recently. I don't know if you've been there.
Yep.
And that's a really amazing space. It's a series of fields with a sort of a few estate houses on it. There's cows and stuff. There's a pond. But it's dotted around with loads and loads of sculpture. And we encounter these massive or small or intricate or different sets of sculptures in this big space, and we're confronted by them. There's massive sculptures by Matisse and Sean Scully, and there's one in particular. There's a sky space that's by James Turrell. He's an artist who works predominantly with light, and he asks us to come into a space and to sit down, and we look up at the sky, and he's cut a big hole in the roof of this structure, so we just see the sky passing us by in this frame. And for him, I see his work is about allowing us the space and allowing us the time to look up and to contemplate what it is that we're looking at, and to stop. We stop and we just look at the sky, and we look at the sky in a way that we've never looked at the sky before, because you're on the way to get the bus, you go to Tesco's, when do you have the time to stop and look at the sky? So I think in a way, for me, art inspires us by giving us reflection time, space to contemplate.
I love it, and I completely agree that we never stop
Mm.
enough to really contemplate what's going on around us.
Mm.
And when we stop, we change our brainwave state. We move into something called alpha and theta, and it really brings out a creativity in people. So I love the fact you talked about just getting out and into different spaces, because I think that's the most amazing way to do it. I mean, we spoke not long ago, but I'm looking at you now, and you've painted the wall behind you, and that gives you something else, something different to look at. But you painted the sky, of which you probably go into an imagination or memory when you look at that helps inspire you
Yeah.
on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, I mean, I painted the sky and a landscape because I don't have a window.
I love it.
So I decided to make a window by painting on it. But yeah, I mean, the sky, I noticed that a lot about my time in China. I was looking at the sky, and the sky is really different. You hear a lot of people who live in different parts of the world who say, gosh, the sky's really different over here. I remember having an Australian friend who said the sky always seemed much bigger over in Australia. And it's going to change because of the position of the
Yeah,
land and how we see the light and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's that expanse, it's that space that allows us for being and reflecting that the sky has.
absolutely. And the art that you've put into your studio has changed your environment. So it's
Mm-hmm.
broken down the barriers of your environment to change your perspective, which I love. Um,
Mm.
but what's really interesting is that the world we live in, we see, well, I personally see art being used less and less. And that may just be my viewpoint. But do you
Mm.
think the current system that we have, and let's talk about the UK, let's talk about the area that we live in. We've got listeners all around the world, but let's focus on our area.
Mm.
Do you think the
Mm-hmm.
system supports creativity?
Um, a complex question. I think it's a really pertinent question to be asking right now because I think there's a lot of realizations and there's a lot of research and studies being done about how important creativity is. And that's not new. I mean, I think those questions are being asked for quite a while now. I think in a sort of classical way, if we're still under a capitalist system, a capitalist system is always wanting our time, wanting our productivity, focused to the maximum on money, basically, isn't it? So when we live in a system that demands so much of our time, demands so much of certain ideas of productivity, and that could be, how much money are you making, to, how many are you going to the gym enough, kind of thing. Those demands make being able to step into an area where you can walk into the unexpected very difficult. If we look at schools and we look at how the timetable is split up, you have 45 minutes of maths, then you have 45 minutes of English, then you have a 15-minute break, then you have 45 minutes of French, then you have to have games in the afternoon. Actually, where is the time to encounter things that make you stop and question and think and reflect? And I think a lot of that is about, there's a certain idea that I think there's a slightly romantic notion that artists kind of lays about and are idle sometimes. Or I think that's quite an old-fashioned idea, but anyway, there's the kind of bohemian, like drinking a bottle of wine, with a cigarette in hand kind of thing. And it's not how it is. But in a way, it's interesting because I think idleness, or the ability to have space to, experiment with what happens when you pour ink down a page and, stick some paint in it that shouldn't go with it, or what happens if you make a wire sculpture but then you dip it in glue and then stick feathers on it. There's a certain sense in which you need to have that time and space to make mistakes, to be a bit idle, to stick your fingers in some clay, pull them out, and just see what happens and see where that goes. So in terms of how our system supports creativity, I'm not really sure that it does, because I think to be creative, you need to allow yourself that space to be slightly idle, to make mistakes, to go down paths that don't quite make sense, or to, go down a route in your studio that actually leads you nowhere, and then you have to come all the way back up, and then you have to go down another direction. But that's valuable time, isn't it? Because you've learned something. It's just that wasn't the right thing to do.
I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying. And I love it, because if we think about how we learn best as children when we're growing up, we learn by being creative. We learn by grabbing a bit of dirt and eating it and rubbing it on our face and experimenting with textures and sounds and noises. Our brain develops at a phenomenal rate. And then we get into dogmatic teaching that has been taught the same for decades. When you actually break it down, it's extremely outdated. It's extraordinary. So I think art is essential for a rounded person. And you look at these people who are creative, it's been stamped out of them at a certain point in their life. Things like, don't talk to strangers. Simple sayings like this as you're growing up, limit your box.
Yeah.
And then people hit 30, 40, 50 and wonder where the last 10, 20, 30 years has gone. Because they've been able to explore themselves. One of the reasons I loved talking to you and getting you on this show is because I think creativity is essential. And I firmly believe we should play more, experiment more, and open up our consciousness to a side of life that we haven't explored yet. Do you think creativity is essential to develop a person?
Yes. I mean, I definitely do. And I think it also depends on what we mean by creativity. Because I think there's perhaps a tendency for people maybe to think that being creative necessarily means being good at one of the creative arts. So being a good painter, or being a good drawer, or being able to play the piano well. Those things are creative. And actually I don't think that's what being creative means at all. Being creative, I think, means being willing to make mistakes. Being courageous, I think, having the self-confidence to go out there and do something that other people might look at and not really understand or really get. And that could be anything. That could be the way you dress. It could be the way going out and dancing. It could be anything. I think creativity is sort of responding to situations and encounters slightly differently. And so I think if we broaden out what our definition of being creative is, it could change the ordinary mundane parts of our life, because it could be walking out, doing your daily shop, but noticing and stopping at various points around you and having a creative relationship, I guess, to life unfolding before you. So it's not necessarily about being an artist with a capital A. I think it's responding to life as it unfolds and welcoming in the natural differences and expectations that come of it. So we have an idea of how things will go, and when they don't go like that, we can freak out, but actually being able to welcome in those differences and respond to them is perhaps also being creative.
I love your answer. I love it. Something I talk to people about a lot, and I think you've said it in a way that I've never heard it explained before, which is brilliant, is present time consciousness, is being aware and present in every moment. And oftentimes we're not, because we're always focused on the future, like what's next, what's happening next, what's happening next. And you said just be creative and appreciate and accept what's coming towards you, and think of it in that moment, which I think is beautiful. And it comes full circle back to what you're saying: 45 minutes of this, 45 minutes of that, and 50 minutes of this. There's no time to stop and just
No.
So I think that's amazing, and I've learned so much from this conversation with you. It's incredible, and I know that everybody listening has learned so much too. But what I'd love them to go away with, and maybe you've just touched on it there, but for people to start becoming creative and artists in their own life, where would you encourage them to start?
I think, well, we slightly touched on it there, but I do think being able to slow down is such a good way of starting, because it's amazing. I mean, I did it on my walk to the studio here. It's amazing how much of our lives we spend, as you said, either projecting into the future, looking at what's been in the past, or planning. And it's amazing how much time we spend on autopilot. I go, I do this, then I need to go and do that, then I'm going to do that, then I'm going to look at my phone on the bus for as long as I can, because I'm bored and I'm slightly dissatisfied. So I'm just going to hope that the day passes quite quickly in that series of, going from this to this to this. But as soon as we slow down, we let things come in. I think that's the best way I can put it. So as soon as we slow down, we notice things. And when we start noticing things, it means we start paying attention to things. And when we start paying attention to things, things come back to us. So whether that's, noticing the shape of a jar, or noticing the shape of a shadow underneath a pencil case, or whether it's running your hand along railings and seeing what noise they make, or doing that with a stick or something, it's those moments where you feel things coming back at you that you can pick up on and then push forward as a creative project, I think. So I would say slowing down. And I guess meditation is, I'm a big fan of meditation, and I think meditation is a big way to slow down. But I'm also conscious that a lot of people, it becomes a bit of one of those, oh gosh, you're one of those people who meditate kind of thing. But it can mean a lot of different things. And actually, if your form of meditation is just walking slowly back from your local shop, or walking slowly, maybe what happens if you walk slowly with your kids to school, you try and leave a bit earlier. What kind of things arise? What do you notice? And it's in that noticing that I think gives you creative energy.
I'm speechless. It's amazing. It's so true. The people who say meditation isn't for me and have these funny little turns when we start talking about this are the people who need this the most. The thing I say to them is, we're all born with about 30,000 days on this planet. That's it. 30,000 days. It's not a lot. And the faster we rush them away, the faster they're gone, and they will never come back.
Mm.
Everything that you have said, if people just start to put that into practice, just slow their walk down, give themselves some more time, maybe just sit for 5 minutes and listen.
Mm-hmm.
I love the fact you said run your hands along the railings. I'm going to do that on my way to work today. And walk on a wall when you're a fully grown adult. Things like that. Just change the status quo. I apologise for the banging in the background. That's someone on my door, but they can leave. Ginny, it's been absolutely amazing to speak to you today. It's really opened my eyes up in a very calm and holistic way, which I really, really like. It's certainly going to change the focus as I move forward, and I know all the listeners will certainly get a lot from this. So thank you very much for being on the show today. I really, really appreciate it.
Good, thank you. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. Really good.
Okay. Take care, and we'll speak to you soon.
All right. Okay, all the best.
That was good. I enjoyed that.
It was brilliant. Really good.